faces on paper, curled at the edges, names said once and swallowed by time. Rooms went quiet, streets moved on. Something about this never died. Cold hands on cold files, dust where the truth should be. Every lie leaves a footprint, every monster bleeds eventually. For the missing that never came home, for the cases they tried to forget, for the killers counting days in the dark, thinking they're done with that. We keep digging, keep the light on.
All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. My name is 12 Gauge, and this is my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining me. Oh my gosh, I just got a brain freeze. And if you've ever had one of those, you understand it kind of takes your breath away. So excuse me for a minute while I thaw out and get my thoughts back. Man, they went all out tonight at Sonic for sure, man. I went and got me a strawberry milkshake. If you've never had one from Sonic, they're pretty damn good. This one gave me a brain freeze, so I'm still trying to get it together. But while I have your attention, I'm going to talk about something that's pretty serious going on in Houston, Texas. As you know, in that area this past weekend, when I was around those bayous, I just didn't stop and get any footage. But when my friend Jules and I, we were walking around the Texas killing field, we were talking on the way back about the bayous and about how many people have died in these bayous in Houston. And it's alarming how many people have died. I think there had been about 300, possibly, over time. That's a lot. 80-something have been homeless, that they've tied to the homeless population. But listening to some of the reasoning behind these drownings, it's going to really blow your mind because nobody wants to call it a potential serial killer down in these bayous. They want to call it, just like they do in Austin, drownings. So all these people are mysteriously drowning in these bayous. And I get it, during hurricanes and things like that, the water rises. They have a lot of bayous in the Houston area. But is it really that coincidental that all these people are drowning due to drown, due to the water. Well, let's hear what the latest in Buffalo Bayou, the news has to say about this. Fox 26 News.
After a man's body was discovered in the water.
That's right. In case you missed that, a man's body was discovered in the bayou. This all comes after more than 30 bodies were found in the area in bayous last year. Reporter Carrie Spelger is live near Commerce Street where the latest body was pulled. Carrie's.
Yeah, this all happening along Buffalo Bayou, actually not far from Main Street, so not far from where I'm standing right now. And according to Houston police, this started when a group of men were working along the bankhead of the bayou around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They say they spotted what appeared to be the body of an adult man in the water. And police say the medical examiner and homicide investigators are now handling that follow-up investigation. Now, at this point, that man has not been identified. A cause of death has not been determined yet either. Here's what we heard from police earlier.
Our officers responded along with the fire department and found a.
And I was, like I was saying to you guys, I was in that area. I just didn't get down to get footage. But I passed right along that patch of interstate going through there. And my friend Jules was telling me, she said that Houston has made it where they have bike trails that get you all through the city. Like you can get on a bike trail and maneuver your way all through the city. And along these trails, obviously, for ambiance is a lot of bayous. So think about the individuals that usually gravitate to the bayou areas. As sad as it is, most people that do are homeless. Let's hear some more.
Body there. That male is deceased here at the scene. Medical examiner or homicide are conducting a follow-up investigation. At this point, we don't have an identity or cause of death. We're ongoing investigation. As soon as we have more information, we'll get that out to you.
It's important to note that in previous cases, it's been hard to determine a cause of death or even identify the bodies that have been found in Houston area bayous because of the water and how that can impact the deterioration of the body. This is the first body that's been recovered in a Houston area bayou this year. Last year, 34 were recovered. For Fox 26 News, I'm Kara Spelger.
Yeah. So 34, think about that. 34 people have been recovered from the water. That is 34 too many, if you ask me. Let's watch this one. Law and Crime has a good stuff.
3 more bodies have been pulled from.
I'm just kind of leery of using their stuff, you know what I mean? But we will use it because they do excellent reporting, and this is just for educational purposes. And as you can see in this this shot of the bayou, you could be walking along here, and if something malicious was to happen to you, you wouldn't be far from the water. Let's hear what they got to say.
One of Houston's bayous, reigniting online fears once again of the so-called infamous bayou killer. Police insist there is no serial offender at large, but with bodies continuing to pile up and social media buzzing, the questions are just getting louder. We are going to dig into what's really happening in Houston's waterways, all with a former FBI and CIA agent. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So we've been on this story, by the way, since I think the beginning. We've been trying to cover every single development that we can. And the reason that we can do that is because of the amazing support that we get from our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm, a firm with over 1,000 attorneys who have recovered 25. Morgan, the room talked about of a bayou killer. They are just getting louder than ever.
34 people have been found in these bayous. Once again, I echo that in almost a battle cry to people watching this. 34 people. dead along these bayous. And many people say, well, that's not a big deal. That's nothing really major. That's just like 34 people that you know tomorrow will not be here. Out of the blue.
Before TikTok, Instagram, from users and commenters who are just posting things and trying to connect the dots, convinced that something sinister is stalking the city's waterways. And now you have a DA, arguably Houston's top prosecutor, who's shutting it all down. Maybe I should say trying to shut it down pretty hard. In an exclusive interview with NBC affiliate KPRC, Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier made his position brutally clear, saying, quote, there is nothing, and I want to be crystal clear, to indicate that there is someone operating here as a serial killer. It is.
So let me ask you this question. If you're watching or you're listening, or if you're half interested in what I'm talking about, what is your definition of a serial killer? Because I know what my definition is, and I've shared it before, and you know it if you are involved in true crime at all. You understand what the definition of a serial killer is. So a serial killer is two or more people in a consecutive time period. There could be a cooling off time, and then they kill again within a matter of days, weeks, and so on. As we've discussed in this channel, there are differences in mass spree killing, organized and unorganized killers, but they deny that there's anything like that with 34 people just passing away.
The official on the record denial. So if it's not a predator, right? If it's not a series of predators, not a serial killer, several people acting in concert, what is causing this grim pattern of bodies just washing ashore? Authorities point to what they say is a heartbreaking combination of Houston's homelessness crisis, mental health struggles, the danger of this environment. You're talking about over 2,500 miles of waterways. But here's a fact that just keeps the rumor mill churning. It is spurning a lot of questions. It's what can leave families without answers. According to data that was obtained by KPRC2 from the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office, nearly 40% of the roughly 200 bodies that have been recovered from Houston area bayous since 2017 have, at one point in time, an officially undetermined cause of death. So that means that after autopsies and investigations, forensic experts seemingly can't conclusively say whether it was an accident or a homicide.
Okay, so 40% undetermined. That's a whole hell of a lot of people not to know what happened to them. You get what I'm saying here? And here, after we finish this podcast on this part, I'm going to show another video that Jewel sent me that hopefully will clear up why it's so difficult to give definitive explanations of these people that are dying along these waterways. Let's continue on.
Or a case of self-harm. So is this a tragic series of unrelated incidents, or is the truth hiding in that large stack of undetermined cases? We are looking at the data behind the drama, the official pushback against the panic, trying to make sense of it once again. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Houston, by the way, it is a massive city that's crisscrossed by these slow-moving, often murky waterways called bayous. They're part of the landscape. For years, bodies have unfortunately been found in them, but something changed in the public's mind recently. The real spark for the current fear and all the online rumors seemingly happened back in September of last year, because in just 1 week, so from September 15th to the 20th, 2025, 5 bodies were pulled from different bayous around the city, and a 6th was found on September 26th. We're talking about Buffalo Bayou, Brays Bayou, Greens Bayou. So different individuals, different locations, all within days. The stories were tragic. You had a university student last seen leaving a bar, a man who was reportedly afraid of water, another seen apparently jumping in. The rapid fire pace of these discoveries, one after another, it was chilling. It didn't feel like a coincidence to a lot of people watching the news or scrolling online. And it arguably started on the morning of September 15th in Brays Bayou, with a woman identified as 20-year-old Jade McKissick.
And we had talked about this one because I showed this one. I was looking this up actually as this popped up, but think about what he's saying. People are just drowning or dying, and nobody knows why. Nobody knows why. Does she look like she could not swim? She looks like she's very active, very fit, but look can be deceiving, especially if you have other circumstances placing you in the body of water in which you are unfamiliar with. We all know that.
University of Houston student who had gone missing after leaving a bar. Now, we're going off of the reporting from the Houston Chronicle when it comes to their ages, but investigators said that preliminarily, there was no obvious signs of foul play. Then, just a few hours later, that same day, another body was recovered from Greens Bayou, identified as 43-year-old Rodney Chapman. The very next day, September 16th, a third person, 24-year-old Seth Hansen, was found in White Oak Bayou. The very next day, September 16th, a third person, 24-year-old Seth Hansen, was found in.
So day after day, they're pulling bodies out of these bayous. You're telling me that that's coincidental? And I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but think about this a little bit. Think about this a little bit. If every day they pulled somebody dead out from your backyard, you wouldn't start to question that a little bit? You would start to question if possibly something sinister was happening to make these people be dead in your backyard? Or would you say, it is what it is. Nothing to see here. Tell me, be honest with me. Would you really do that? Or would you really start to question, is there something bigger going on with the Houston bayous?
White Oak Bayou. 2 days after that, September 18th, a fourth body was discovered in Buffalo Bayou. He was 63-year-old Arnulfo Alvarado. And though his cause of death was later determined to be from methamphetamine toxicity and drowning, the manner of death was ruled accidental. But you go to September 20th, okay? Fifth body was pulled from Buffalo Bayou. That victim was 67-year-old Michael Rice. And then finally, on September 26th, as I mentioned, a sixth body was found in Buffalo Bayou downtown. The victim was initially a Jane Doe, described as a young woman with a distinctive 888 tattoo on her wrist, was later identified as Michaela Miller. So you have 5 bodies in 5 days, a sixth just days later. It was that
5 bodies in 5 days. Talk to me here, because that just does not add up in my mind when it comes to these deaths. All of a sudden, just out of nowhere, over time, either they've been keeping this a secret, the media's been hiding it, maybe they've been talking about it, and nobody really wants to really elaborate on the reasoning behind these drownings, just like they do in Austin. You know, when we hear about a body being pulled from Lady Bird Lake, they drowned. It's never they were intoxicated, they were under the influence of chemicals. No, they drowned. Okay, nothing to see. We pull you from the lake, bam, on to the next. You know what I mean? How come this isn't being talked about a lot more than it is? I mean, I've seen a lot of podcasters doing this story, but it seems to be like people really don't care.
terrifying rapid cluster, right? Different people, different waterways, all within a brutally short time frame. That's what broke the pattern of these being seen as isolated tragedies. That's what made the city's nerves snap. That's what launched this bayou killer theory into the mainstream. In direct response, you had Houston Mayor John Whitmire and Police Chief No Diaz, who held a press conference. They were adamant. The mayor looked into the cameras and stated this.
Let me say it again. There is no evidence that there's a serial killer loose on the streets of Houston. If there was, you would hear it from me first.
Now, officially, the explanation has consistently pointed to broader, heartbreaking social issues. Houston's significant homeless population, mental health problems, substance abuse issues, the simple, dangerous geography of the bayous themselves. And that is the tense backdrop that has been building for months. You have public fear of a pattern versus official insistence that there are unrelated, if alarmingly frequent, tragedies. And that was the uneasy status quo until just last week, when there were 3 more bodies that were found. So this is renewing this conversation, this debate all over again. And this is why you're seeing a new response from authorities. So to help break all this down, I want to bring on a special guest. We got former FBI special agent, CIA special operations officer, News Nation legal contributor, author of The Unexpected.
So that individual was hardcore to say, if there was, I would be the first to say. Would he really, though? And once again, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon of being an individual that doesn't believe in certain things. But I need to ask you that question. Do you believe that he'd really be transparent with all the monetary gain that comes to Houston and the surrounding areas? You're really going to tell the tourists, hey, we got a serial killer on our hands?
Spy, what a resume. Tracy Walder, thank you so much for coming on. Always appreciate it. You and I have been talking about this for, I think since September, when we got into all of these bodies piling up. And before we even get into the new bodies that have been discovered, I just have to start with this, okay? The official stance versus public perception, right? So police, the mayor, they have repeatedly said essentially there's no evidence of a serial killer, that these are tragic but isolated incidents that are driven by a variety of social issues. Now, from your investigative perspective, from your lens, when you hear a phrase, there's no evidence, what does that actually mean in a situation like this? What would investigators need to see?
Okay, now she's going to talk about the evidence that is needed in order to define whether there is actually a serial killer, whether it's just circumstantial that these people are coming up dead, or if really they don't know. Does that make sense? Can you hear me? I don't see that little thing. All right, can you hear me? Somebody say something, please. Okay, now it's moving. It wasn't moving before. Here we go.
To even begin considering a serial predator theory?
I think one of the biggest things that they would need to see, Jesse, is the same manner of death, the same way in which an individual was killed sort of across the board. Typically, serial killers tend to murder individuals in the same manner or leave.
Okay, let's write that down. If you're taking notes and you're keeping notes going, let's type that up in the chat. Is there anybody in the chat? I'm going to put this in the chat. Same manner. I don't know if y'all can hear me. Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? Testing 1, 2. Can y'all hear me? Is there anybody in here that can tell me you can hear me? Let's go on with this.
Calling cards, those kinds of things, or take things. I think that would probably be the biggest thing that law enforcement would need to see.
Because people will look at this and say, oh, well, then how do you characterize Gilgo, right? The suspected killer there. That was a killing that was categorized and identified by the area in which the bodies were found.
I think the thing with the Gilgo Beach is that they ultimately were able to tie, obviously, Hillerman's DNA to these individuals. And so if they can find that, which I have to be completely honest, I don't think is going to happen in a situation like this. In the case of Gilgo Beach, the women were not submerged. I think in a case where you've got water, individuals found in bodies of water.
Okay, and if you missed that earlier, I did a premiere on the Gilgo Beach Killer, and it is a new updated type of premiere that I did earlier. So if you didn't check that out earlier, you might check it out on my page. So they're saying it's totally different than the Gilgo Beach case because of the manner in which these bodies are being found. I really like how this lady explains things. She's pretty people friendly.
A lot of evidence, forensic evidence, it goes to the wayside as a result of that, and it's contaminated. So I think for them, especially when you've got multiple bodies in water, it's going to be about how they were killed and less about the DNA that could potentially tie them all together.
I mentioned at the top that initially a lot of those deaths were undetermined. That's not the case, for all of them still. There have been some explanations, but is it surprising to you that you would see a number of deaths maybe in this manner that are undetermined? You mentioned the water, you mentioned maybe some of the certain characteristics. Were you surprised when you were reading about this and you look at these clusters that a lot of these deaths initially were undetermined or even for a period?
And also I would think, or I would want to believe that the age range of these people would have something to do with it as well. The toxicology reports, is there any kind of chemicals, kind of like that one individual that they found, the methamphetamine in his system?
Period of time undetermined.
Per my calculations, just the data that's out there, 19 are undetermined, 1 is still pending. So if you've got 33 total now, obviously it's pretty heavy, right, in the undetermined area. But a couple of things about that. I think one of the things that's getting people concerned, and they're less likely to believe, the mayor, law enforcement, whoever's making the statements, is just the sheer volume. The amount of people that have been pulled out of bayous since 2019 has tripled. And so I think that's what concerns a lot of individuals. Now, in terms of the undetermined, I think it depends, and I don't want to be too specific about when these individuals went into the bayou, what time of year they went into the bayou. All of those things are going to matter. And honestly, their remains may make it really, really difficult to determine how they were killed, particularly if it wasn't a beating or a gunshot wound, anything that's going to.
Hey, Walt, can you tell me if you can hear me? Like she was saying, there's two different types of death. Was it a shooting? Was it a knife? Was it something of that accord? What was the manner in which they died? Thank you so much. Because I wasn't sure if people could hear me because I don't see the little green buttons like scrolling. But she's describing this to a T. Like if one was shot, one was stabbed, one was an accidental drowning, couldn't swim, one was beaten, were the circumstances the same in all the bodies that they're finding?
Leave anything on the bones. If it was an overdose kind of situation, that may be degraded and they may not be able to tell.
And when you look at that September cluster, right? So you have people of different ages, genders, from different social circles. They're found in different waterways across this sprawling city. On its face, right? That lacks a classic serial killer signature. But is it possible? Is it possible, Tracy, right, that you have an offender who is creating this deliberate variation to deliberately throw investigators off?
In my opinion, 100%. I mean, Buffalo Bayou encompasses about 500 miles just in general, right? Like not in Houston proper. Buffalo Bayou and Braves Bayou, those are the two that I would say the.
So 500 miles of waterway, okay? That's a lot of water for an individual to either slip into the water, be pushed into the water. I don't know. I can't really fathom. If you can help me out in the chat, what are some ways that these people might have lost their lives either on the shore or ultimately in the water? Because we all know that if somebody drowned, chances are that they have water in their lungs when they're found. If they're found without water in their lungs, that technically means that they were killed and thrown in the water. And in the Austin Lady Bird Lake case, a lot of those bodies, as we did in that live that we've done on the Lady Bird case, um, a lot of those bodies that were pulled from the water had no water in their lungs. So that would be interesting to find out if any of these people had water in their lungs.
Majority have probably been found. Of course, there's other ones, but Bray's Bayou is about 31 miles, right? And so when you're looking at something like that, that is a huge span, right? So putting a body in at a different location would obviously be very easy, but obviously there's currents that move bodies as well. So yes, I think anything is possible. You don't want to ever discount something completely, but that may account just the sheer size for why we are seeing so many, but it's hard to tell. This is a little different.
And do y'all believe that due to social media and everything that is broadcast almost instantaneous, or if people get fixated on a certain case, it breeds copycat killers? Like when I'm thinking of this case, I'm thinking of Riley Strain. It just popped into my head. And I was thinking to myself, for a long time, the Riley Strain case was something huge. The Lady Bird Lake case has been huge. Smiley Face Killers cases have been huge. Do you believe that people can honestly become copycats of sorts? Because still we have not heard, or at least I haven't heard, that the reason for Riley passing away. The last we knew is he supposedly fell in the water, drifted down a mile and a half, was found by a barge. That's all we were told. It seems like they don't tell you anything more than, okay, this person died, they drowned, or they were just found floating face up, blah, blah, blah. We don't know who they are. Not really sure how they got here. And nobody ever really says that they see anything or pull anything from any type of surveillance camera. They don't get the same exposure as some of these other crimes, wouldn't you say?
Than Austin and Lady Bird Lake, which is only 10 miles.
I want to get into this new development that's reignited this conversation, okay? Because just last week, as we moved into the new year, you had 3 more bodies that were recovered from Houston bayous in a matter of days. December 22nd, one body was pulled from the Buffalo Bayou in downtown Houston. Another was recovered from the Brays Bayou in the Pine Valley neighborhood. Christmas Eve, December 24th, a third body was found in the Buffalo Bayou near the Rice Military neighborhood. Now, at last check, the autopsy results remain pending. That's not necessarily unsurprising given how recent this is. But if my calculations are correct, that brings the total number of bodies recovered from Houston area bayous in 2025 alone to 34. So nearly matching last year's entire count, right?
So I'm going to pause it right there, and I'm going to go into the other part that I want to show you while I'm thinking about it. And this is it's a podcast called Knife After Death. And it's going to be talking about drowning, okay? So it's going to be able to give you a little bit of understanding. I haven't listened to this, so I'm listening to this with you for the first time as well. So here we go.
Key ingredient for dinner this evening? Or you need a new phone charger right before your next trip? Prime Air is here to get you what you need right. Important topic. Basically, what I have understood by being on social media is that people don't understand how a lot of these concepts work in forensic pathology. Drowning is right at the top of the list. Probably one of the most misunderstood causes of death that exists, right? Because when you think about like gunshot wounds, stab wounds, blunt force trauma due to an accident or something, it's pretty obvious the cause of death. It's oftentimes the manner that the pathologist is trying to determine. But when it comes to something like drowning, and I am directly quoting a textbook on this topic, there are no pathognomonic findings of drowning. So what does that word mean, pathognomonic? It basically means there are no specific findings that guarantee an investigator that this is a drowning. Versus something like, let's just say, an aortic rupture. With an aortic rupture, a pathognomonic finding is going to be a breach in the intimal surface of the blood vessel, blood collecting in the tissues surrounding the aorta, and even in the pleural or abdominal cavities.
Okay, I like this guy already. So as you heard him say, there's no pathognomonic findings in a drowning, which specific diagnostic findings did they find whenever they find somebody that has supposedly drowned?
So that would be like a pathognomonic finding. We usually don't use that term except for in surgical pathology. So in surgical pathology, there are thousands and thousands of diagnoses that we have to make, many of which have a pathognomonic finding, which allows us to make the diagnosis definitively. Drowning is not one of those. And so, instead of doing like a specific breakdown of a particular case, and I know there's been one in the news recently where a lot of true crime amateur kind of like commentators on the issue have opined, have given their opinion on the case, and that therefore the medical examiner must be wrong because they have determined that it's a drowning, despite never investigating a drowning case and having no training in doing so. And here's the crux. And so I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like, how can I most succinctly explain drowning in a way that everyone understands? And unfortunately, it's difficult to be succinct because you have to understand a lot about the body in terms of anatomy and physiology to understand drowning. But I'm going to give it a shot. Number one, the lungs are not bags, okay? So every time someone gets diagnosed with drowning, and it doesn't matter if it's, Riley Strain, or it is Aaron Carter, or it is Matthew Perry, it does not matter. There's always a line in these autopsy reports that says no water was found in the lungs. And then, these people will take that line, they'll go on, they'll make their TikToks,
See, there you go. That showed you how wrong I was. And I'm not above admitting being wrong. Thank you, Dr. Wolf, for clarifying that, because I've always heard that. And I hope that you understand what he just said. And let's continue on, because he is giving us some teachable stuff right now.
their YouTube, and they'll say, clearly it wasn't drowning because there was no water in the lung. Okay, let me explain why that is. The lungs are not bags. The lungs are sponges. Okay, if you've ever followed me on any social media, you have seen me post pictures of lungs that are cut open, and they are not empty bags. They are very dense sponges. And as a result, if you were to take the lung, turn it upside down, you're not going to have water pouring out of the bronchus. The water enters those little tiny airways, those microscopic alveoli, and can make the lung heavy. That's called pulmonary edema, intraalveolar fluid. And that's why you don't have, quote, water in the lungs. Here's what, first of all,
I love that. I love the way he's explaining this, man, because I was wrong. I was wrong. I like being wrong and learning something new. Thank you.
let me say that if you ever train with me, I will tell you to never put that in a drowning autopsy report, because it is an absolutely meaningless phrase. I have seen countless drownings. The first case I ever did as a forensic pathology resident was a drowning, and I have done countless, dozens upon dozens of cases since then over the last 10 years. And the number of times I have been able to take a lung and try to empty water out of it, I would say less than 5% of the time. And the only way that you can tell that water from a body of water, like a pond or a creek or something, was in there is because you see other things that are in the bronchus that show you that it was a type of groundwater or fresh water, such as a little bit of like mud or little, I guess, sedimentary things in the water that come out of the bronchus, sand, even small creatures that you can see, little tiny little fish or something like that. Sometimes you'll see that. But that's the only way. So if you've got somebody that drowns in a relatively clear kind of water, like a pool, for instance, it's not common to take the lung and be able to pour water out of it, because again, it's a sponge. Water is entering into that sponge, and the body literally soaks it up. And here's another key. This is another key. If the heart is beating after the water enters the lungs and the breathing is ceasing, the heart beating for even a few seconds or a minute or something like that can actually extract some of that water out of the alveoli into the vascular system. So in other words, you can have a drowning where there's a lot of water swallowed, but then you get the lungs and there's really not much there because the heart was beating after the breathing stopped. Okay.
There you go. There's part number 2. Welcome to the anatomy class today, folks. This dude is pretty good. I think I'm going to follow him.
But so that's the first thing. You have to understand lungs are not bags. You will almost never be able to pour water out of a lung. Just not something that happens. What you do is you measure the weight of the lungs, which are typically in an adult, maybe 300 to 400 grams, something like that. But in a drowning lung, if there's a lot of water soaked up into that sponge, they'll be heavy. They might be 700 grams or 800 grams or 1,000 grams combined.
Wow.
Also, when you cut the lung, instead of it being soft and not very wet, the foam will actually pour out of the cut surface. Okay. Now, the caveat to that is that's not always the case. And I will get to that point in just a moment of why the lungs don't have any water in them at all. The second part you have to know about this is that it doesn't take very much water to actually drown a person. Okay. Let me give you an indication. And this is straight from the textbooks. The amount of water that it takes to create a drowning is quoted in the source Dolinak, which is a great forensic pathology book. That's the one I always refer to when I need to look up something. Is 1 to 3 milliliters of water per kilogram of body weight. So let's say somebody weighs 70 kilograms, which is about 150 pounds. You can drown with as little as 70 milliliters of water in being swallowed down into your lungs.
My head just exploded. I don't know if yours did or not, but my head just exploded. Wow. Thank you, Jules, for turning me on to this guy. And this is my friend Jules, or Joy, not Jules, the other Jules. This is my friend Jules, the one in the videos with me and stuff. This guy's awesome, Dr. Wolf. So he is on the Podbean podcast, Knife After Death. So if you go to this podcast, be sure you subscribe to him if you're enjoying what he's talking about. And I'm going to show you some other stuff that he's done that might interest you on some true crime cases.
And on the high end, it's going to be 200 milliliters. Okay. So to put that into perspective, and I'm not going to do the conversion to how many tablespoons or cups that is, because I can't do it in my head because I need to look it up. But what you need to understand is that most of you listening to this have probably had at least one science class, and in that science class, you can think about beakers where you've mixed chemicals in. The most common beaker used in, let's say, a high school chemistry or biology class is probably a 500 milliliter beaker. So the maximum amount of water in these cases is usually about 3 milligrams per kilogram, or milliliters per kilogram, or 200 mils. So less than half of a 500 milliliter beaker can produce drowning. That's not very much. Now, let's circle back to what I said. It's a sponge. It would be very easy for lungs, two big lungs, one on the right side, one on the left side, to soak up 200 milliliters of additional fluid. And in addition, you have to understand the lung is kind of, there's fluid in it already. Inside of the airways, we have a fluid called surfactant, and that allows for the alveoli to expand and contract appropriately, and it helps in diffusion of oxygen and CO2 across the membranes.
So let me know if you're enjoying this guy as much as I am. If you are, press the number 1 in the chat. Press the number 2 if you're trying to pay attention but really don't understand it. You can always go back and listen to it again. Let's continue on, shall we?
So you've got surfactant. You've also got lymph, as you know, from lymph being drained to the lymph nodes. And you've also got blood. So the lungs themselves already have a lot of fluid in them, but not in the airways. The key is, where is the fluid? And so if you inhale 200 milliliters of water in a drowning situation, that could be enough to fill those alveoli enough to decrease the oxygen exchange, which is what produces death. Okay. So, you know, I'm just trying to get at the fact that it doesn't take much water. Okay. That's point number 2. Point number 1, the lungs are not bags. And point number 3 is that you actually don't need water inside of the lungs for it to be a drowning. Now, that sounds confusing, right? But that's because there's a lot to the science of death that is not a public knowledge, that people don't understand. We do autopsies on people who have drowned, and sometimes we find lungs that are big and fluffy and airy, and that's the only way to describe them. They're so filled with air that the lungs will actually cover up the heart and touch in the midline. So when we take the sternum and the ribs off, we see the lungs touching, and they're fluffy. And you take the lung out, and if you were to squeeze it, you're not even going to get any fluid out of it. It's going to be like almost like a balloon type effect. So why is that? Well, I'm going to tell you what the theory is. The theory is that the prospect, or the event of drowning resulting in a laryngospasm, which causes the larynx, the vocal folds, to actually close off, which restricts air movement into the body. The epiglottis might actually fold over, just like when we swallow, and the epiglottis covers up the larynx.
I don't know about you, but drowning has always been one of those things that if I was to go in a particular way, that would be the worst way that I could think of. I don't know about you guys, but let me know what your fear of the afterlife knocking on the door is. You know, drowning is one of those that I don't want to do.
You have a laryngospasm, which then produces, it is like a suffocation. So the person is in water, they are struggling, they are drowning, but they are not swallowing water. Okay. I was reading TikTok comments the other day on this case of this kid, I think it was in Nashville, who was found. And I saw creators who were scientists, but not physicians, who were commenting definitively that this person had died prior to going into the water because there was no water in the lungs, and obviously that's the case. And that's the thing. What people don't understand, there's a lot to forensics that doesn't really fall under the realm of regular medicine, okay? And certainly not other scientific creators who, by the way, often chastise people for speaking out of their fields. So, for instance, if I were to speak on cardiology, I'm speaking a little bit out of my realm because I'm not a cardiologist.
To answer your question, PKC, I always thought drowning was like, when a child swallows water, and I think based on what he just said, would have swallowed enough to drown based on the amount of water in the lungs, and it ultimately stops breathing. I think that, I mean, if I got what he was saying correctly, that would be my impression, but that's way over my pay raise, it's way over my pay grade. But if I understood what he was talking about, that kind of like what he was saying, it doesn't take a lot of water to drown you.
Just as if I was going to speak about being an electrician. I don't know anything about that, and I shouldn't speak about it. And so I must say, I was a little irritated to see people speaking so definitively on this matter, because I've laid it out for you already. I could stop the podcast now and you understand that there are people, many people, who drown and do not have water, quote, in the lungs. But we're going to talk about it just a bit more, okay? What are the other findings of drowning? Well, of course, you could have heavy lungs. You can have light and airy lungs. We've already established that. But you also can have water in the stomach if there's a lot of swallowing of water occurring during the drowning incident. Okay. Particularly if you find, again, sedimentary things or aquatic life in the stomach. And yet, this is not a pathognomonic finding either, because after death, the gastroesophageal junction, the sphincter of the esophagus to the stomach, relaxes because muscle relaxes after death. After first of all, immediately after death, and then rigor mortis sets in, and then it relaxes again. So water could passively enter the mouth and go down into the stomach. A decent one that I have found, and this is what being in forensics is a little bit different than regular medicine, is water that you can get from the sinuses. So the sphenoid sinus, the ethmoid sinus. And the way to do this is not quite easy. You don't just go up the nose and put a syringe in there because you're just blindly drawing fluid. You actually have to go in through the base of the skull, and you have to know the anatomy where these sinuses are. So what you do is you try to cut a little aperture in the base of the skull above the sinus and enter, and then you put a needle inside of that, and you try to draw up the fluid. And if you can even test that fluid. They've done that before. So when I see water in the ethmoid sinus or the sphenoid sinus, I feel a little bit better that it's a drowning, but it's also not something we do on every case. It's also something that's not easy to do, and it's not something that certainly the public understands. If this case in Nashville, the doctor said there's water in the ethmoid sinus, I can assure you 99% of the people reading that would probably pass over it and not think anything about it. But the reason why that's not a great test either is sometimes if a person has sinusitis, they can have a little bit of extra fluid in their sinuses. You can see that on CT scans. You'll see a CT scan, it'll say air fluid level in the sinuses. And
to piggyback on what he's saying about being a professional, that's why whenever some of these lab results and some of these things come out, and they're not specific, or it's unrecognizable or unidentified, they deal with it's either this or it's not this, or it's not able to be identified. They don't deal with speculation. It's either yes, no, or unknown. You know what I mean? So based on what he's talking about, it makes a lot of sense that when we hear in true crime about many of the lab results and the forensic stuff, what it comes out in the wording, people misuse that as to it being something else rather than what the forensic people and coroners and everybody else that has their hands in the pie use to describe what it is that they're looking at.
And secondly, you can get some passive water into sinuses. So stomach and sinuses are something there that you look for. But basically, the other thing that comes up here is a lot of people ask me, well, what about dry drowning? Okay.
There we go,
And
PJC.
that's another problem because there's a misunderstanding about what dry drowning means. So there are people who have a drowning incident, but they're revived. And when I say by drowning incident, maybe they're submerged in a pool, they pop up, they get a little bit of CPR, they actually regain their heartbeat, they might even be awake, and then they die like, a few hours later or a day later. A lot of people refer to that as dry drowning. And it may well be a term that's in use in clinical or emergency medicine for that particular thing. And the mechanism there is thought to be that there's electrolyte imbalances as a result of swallowing the water, getting the water into the lungs and having it resorbed into the circulation can cause problems with things like potassium, which can cause cardiac arrhythmia. You can also get brain swelling from having that extra hypotonic fluid in the vascular system. But dry drowning in the forensic sense is what I have just described to you with the laryngospasm. Okay. And the idea is that
Ever find yourself in a time crunch? Maybe you forgot your favorite snacks for your movie night or need a last-minute gift for a party. Take care of the rest. No need to
big, air-filled lungs. And the problem with that in terms of autopsy is that you cannot demonstrate a laryngospasm at autopsy. That is a physiologic occurrence that is occurring at the time of drowning. Larynx slams shut. Your body's trying to breathe. The air in the lungs expanding the lungs to be big and fluffy and airy, which, by the way, has a term, and it's called emphysema aquosum. Okay, that's a term that you will probably never hear in your life. But in forensic textbooks, emphysema aquosum refers to the inflated lungs at the time of drowning. And so the theory is that there may be a physical plug, such as like mucus or, the obstruction due to the laryngospasm, which causes these lungs to be kind of like light and airy and puffy.
Okay, laryngospasm is what causes dry drowning. There we go, PKC. There we go. Thank you for that.
The problem is that this is theory or hypothesis.
Yeah.
We don't actually know the mechanism. But what we do know is the observation where you have a person, let's say, witnessed clearly drowning. You do the autopsy and you find the big fluffy lungs and not the heavy lungs. And sometimes we do autopsies that are witnessed drownings. Okay. And then you'll say, well, why do you do it if it's witnessed? Well, sometimes you do it because you want to find out if a person has had if they're having another type of medical condition like a heart attack, which produced the drowning episode. So that's the main reason why we do it. Also, because these are accidents, and accidents usually require autopsy, particularly if we're talking about life insurance type stuff, because there can be higher payouts for accidental deaths. Third is that oftentimes drownings occur in public spaces, so like public pool or a state park, that type of thing. And as a result, there could be litigation involved. And if there's no autopsy, litigation is essentially, it's much more difficult. Let's put it that way. Right. So there are lots of reasons to do autopsies, even when they're witnessed. But the weirdest ones for me are ones that aren't necessarily witnessed, but ones where you see somebody on like a security camera who have drowned in like let's say an apartment pool or something like that. And I have seen these cases before. And we review those tapes because it's part of the evidence. It's part of the determination of the manner of death. And so it's a little strange to see somebody struggling, and we've actually had to watch people drown on tape. And I'm telling you, it's a really weird thing. And that's one of the parts of forensic pathology that, you know, you have to understand that it can be kind of brutal in that if something is caught on tape, very often we have to review those tapes. So
Can you imagine? Can you imagine having to watch a child drown in a pool? That would be horrific. That'd be the worst thing I could ever see, I believe. I mean, but after a while, I guess it just, you know, you shut the emotions off like it's part of your job and you don't think about emotional attachment. And later on, you break down or whatever.
we have seen people drown in pools. I have seen people get hit by cars. I have seen people shoot themselves. I have seen people shoot other people. And that's something that in this field, if you can't feel like, and I'm a little bit on a tangent here, but if you feel like you can't do that without severe kind of like psychological damage or stress, then this field is probably not for you, because you have to be able to see that stuff and look at it scientifically and then sort of delete it from your mind. And I have seen cases, for instance, of drowning where we've done the autopsy and the person clearly was drowning and struggling in the pool. And then you do the autopsy and you find this emphysema aquosum, where it is big fluffy lungs, no water in the lungs or stomach, and you have probably a laryngospasm or something similar that closes off the airway. So I think that, you know, this is a really quick podcast to let you understand that drowning is something that is not, I would say it's not easily determined. It's determined based on circumstances and not so much on anatomy and pathology. And that's, I think, where the breakdown between what we do and what the public knows or thinks they know is a problem, because the public, I mean, I'll be honest with you. If I didn't do this job, I probably wouldn't realize that either. I wouldn't realize that, oh, well, you mean you there isn't water in the lungs? No, you have to physically look at and touch a lung to see that it is, in fact, a sponge. And so you pour water down the bronchus and it's getting soaked up right into the alveoli. So what I don't understand, though, and this is me just being kind of like, you know, a little bit cantankerous, is why pathologists continue to use this line in autopsy reports. It is almost a meaningless line. And that's just from my experience, it's almost a meaningless line. But I would say that the better way to phrase it would be something like, there is no evidence of aquatic life or sedimentation, dirt within the airways. But to say water or something like that doesn't make any sense, because the water is almost always going to be soaked up into the airways in a drowning incident. Again, one textbook says that almost all drownings are less than 4 milliliters per kilogram of fluid. So again, if we go back to our 70 kilogram person, that's at most 280 milliliters, which is still about half of a 500 milliliter beaker. Okay, so just keep these things in your mind. The lungs are not bags. The lungs are sponges. Laryngospasms can occur, and there are no pathognomonic findings of drowning. So that would be kind of like as much as I want to say on this topic today. But, you know, if you have any questions, you can message me. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to maybe put up a few more posts on this topic so that people can continue to dispel the misunderstandings of drownings, of the drowning process. But again, if you're a young pathologist or a pathology resident or somebody that wants to go into forensics, I would tell you that it's probably not worth saying there's no water in the lungs. What's more important is the lung weight. And then also, I think it's very important. I didn't used to do this, but I think it's kind of important these days to put a comment, like a diagnostic explanation. So if you have a patient with big inflated lungs and no water, I think it's very worthwhile to put a comment and say, well, this could be due to a laryngospasm, which has been theorized in forensic pathology, blah, 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 these textbooks and this research literature. I certainly am going to do that in the future because we live in a time where every single thing that occurs, every single death that occurs is all of a sudden a conspiracy and it's a cover up and it's a murder. And I've had multiple requests this week to talk about this topic for that purpose. So I will, at that point, I think that I will go ahead and wrap up here. And I will remind you that I have a Substack, which has free posts and paid posts. The paid posts are the ones where I'm kind of doing like more advanced pathology and anatomy images and quizzes, probably really good for medical students or healthcare nursing students, things like that. Anybody who's interested in pathology and medicine. So my Substack's kind of my main thing right now. I still have Instagram, The Dead Letter, TikTok, The Dead Letter, not a ton of posting on there lately, but I'm mainly because I'm overwhelmed with comments and I can't respond to everybody. So yeah, if you like those things, you might want to consider, if you like that type of thing, you might consider subscribing. And I hope that I was clear today. And if not, I can do a follow-up. Just send me a message and say, I don't understand what you mean by this, or this was a terrible podcast or something like that.
I believe that this was an awesome podcast. And here's some more of the episodes that I was telling you about that you might go check out. He talked about the forensic complex case of Ellen Greenberg, which we talked about on this channel. We talked about the complex case of Scott Weiland. If you know who Scott Weiland is, he used to be the lead singer for Stone Temple Pilots. And I think he sang for Velvet Underground. I'm not sure. And then there's a forensic questionnaire, part 1, part 2. And he did mention his TikTok, Knife After Death, on Podbean. And his name is Dr. Wolf. And let's finish up that other, and then I will call it a night. Let me know if y'all are still here with me, if y'all are enjoying this. That gave a lot of clarity to exactly what I'm talking about right here.
So the year before's entire count. Now, Tracy, this is a pattern, right, that keeps people up. That you're talking about sudden clustered spike in discoveries. We don't know exactly when one body was deposited in that location, or if you're dealing with an issue where somebody did something to themselves, when they did something to themselves in that area. But 3 new bodies in just a matter of days. As an investigator, what does that tell you?
I think, what that tells me is that, I don't want to say there's a full cause of concern, but at the same time, as I mentioned before, when you have the amount of bodies increasing 3 times what it was in 2019, to me, I would be concerned if I was a resident. Only because I'd be concerned, are these being patrolled properly? Now, I get it. This hundreds and hundreds of swaths, right, of miles of land. I understand that. But are these being patrolled properly? Is there a nefarious individual at hand, right? Like, that raises all those questions in terms of public safety as a whole, not even just a serial killer being on the loose. So I can understand from a public safety perspective.
Also, if there was one person for all these bodies being dumped into this river or this bayou, he's a hell of a killer, man. He's a hell of a killer. Because, I mean, to kill one person almost every day and nobody see, hear, or report anything, that is pretty odd.
Perspective, people being concerned, especially when you got 3 bodies, essentially almost 3 days in a row, right, being pulled out. And honestly, when you look at who these individuals are, I understand their ages kind of are across the spectrum, but really only 3 of them are women. The rest are men. And so I think people are seeing patterns, and that does concern them.
And to be clear, if somebody's not familiar with the geography there, if you're listening to this and saying, well, if law enforcement and the mayor, right, are having to address this, and there's such an outpouring of interest on social media and speculation, why not just dedicate resources to surrounding the bayous to make sure that no one goes near them, or to make sure to have a careful eye on what's going on, or to install a plethora of surveillance cameras? It's not so.
I mean, the thing about the bayous is what I've noticed is the bicycle trail. People go down there and walk their dogs. People are down there jogging. They're down there picnicking. I mean, it's kind of like an area for people to gather, to be within the city, but kind of like a Central Park-esque type of variety for the individual to be out and about downtown. You know what I mean? So to say, well, y'all don't need to go to the bayous, I mean, then tear them down and pour concrete over the whole thing, 500 miles of it.
Simple, even if that was authorized, right?
100%. You hit the nail on the head. I'm a Texan. Obviously, I live here. The bayous are very, very different. Yes, they do patrol them on horseback. They have squads and units who are dedicated to doing that. They patrol them on horseback. They patrol them on bike. These are not areas that you can patrol, via car, those kinds of things. Certainly, they can use drones if they want to be a little bit more effective in terms of the amount of land that they are covering. But this is different, again, than what we see in maybe Chicago, around the lakes, or in Austin, right, where it's a contained body, so it's a lot easier to put security cameras and those kinds of things. These are really, really difficult to patrol, and have an insane amount of manpower that's needed to do that.
Mm-hmm. And now I want to ask about this response. Okay, so in direct response to these 3 new discoveries, you had Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier, who gave an exclusive interview this week to NBC affiliate KPRC, and his message was a forceful echo of what we heard back in September. Now, I want to be clear about what he said, because he stated, quote, "There is nothing, and I want to be crystal clear, to indicate that there is someone operating here as a serial killer. There are many reasons for these deaths. None of them are a serial killer."
Okay, then what the stopping of this individual just saying, okay, well, this one died of drug overdose, or this one died of this, or this one died of that. Or if you just want to use a drowning, just label it a drowning. I mean, to not say anything at all is, in people's mind these days in 2026, is a conspiracy. You're covering up something, you're hiding something. So therefore you're trying to keep people away from the truth, and that's not always the case.
And he directly attributed the tragedies to what he called Houston's, quote, "massive homeless problem, combined with widespread mental health and substance abuse issues." He gave a specific physical explanation, noting, quote, "It's kind of a little known fact, but when you get into the bayous, it is very difficult to get out." When you combine that with someone that is high on some substance, someone that is intoxicated somehow, it makes it even more difficult. And he did acknowledge that, yes, there are times where we recover bodies that were placed in the bayou criminally, no question, but that is not something that is a regular occurrence. Now, Tracy, what do you make of that explanation, and how does he know that?
I think that's, to answer the latter part first, Jesse, I think that's the problem. And I think that might be why so much speculation is running rampant on social media and just amongst Houstonians and Texans as well. Because I think the issue is when you have 19, 20 of these that are attributed to either being undetermined, and then on top of that, about 3 or 4.
I mean, we understand when there's flooding, like right there, obviously it's flooded. If somebody was standing too close to that, slipped and fell, got drawn into the bayou and taken, twisted and turned, hitting branches, whatever. We understand that. But when it's not up like that, and there's a clear walking path, and the grass is mowed, and there's trees that aren't sticking out of the trees sticking out of the water. It's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all.
Being homicide, you only know really what happened to maybe 7 of these individuals, right, per autopsies and those kinds of things. And so I feel for him to sort of make this blanket statement that we know how all of these individuals died, all of those things, when they are undetermined, what 2/3 of them are undetermined, is somewhat irresponsible to do. But again, clearly they're not observing, the similar patterns in how these people died. And I do think that some of them are absolutely attributed to a horrible homeless problem, mental health, and drug addiction issues. However, the ones that are undetermined, you don't know why, because you're not able to get toxicology and those kinds of things on them. And so I think had he kind of caveated it that way, I think it may have landed a bit better.
Okay, I have to be clear about something, okay? I'm going to be very clear. This could all be very true, what he just said. 100% could be very true. But, and I'm not saying he's lying, I'm not saying he's misrepresenting, but I have to ask this question. Is it possible that during the course of an investigation, law enforcement or, the DA or authorities may not be so transparent about what they know or what really is happening? And because there's a fear of inciting the public, there's a fear of what this information would do. Maybe it would taint an investigation. They don't want to alert anybody that they have. Maybe they have somebody in mind. Is it possible in your career, have you ever seen it before, where there is a statement, a conclusion that's said to the public, and yet what is happening behind the scenes is a complete 180?
I've definitely seen that before, obviously, because if you're getting close to capture, I mean, we most recently saw this actually in the Brown University shooting, right? They figured out who the suspect was, and then wouldn't release anything until obviously he was already deceased. And so, listen, it's absolutely something that happens, but I think in a case like this, where you have a bit more of a volume of individuals over these large swaths of land, it would probably be very irresponsible for public safety and public safety purposes to not put out all of the cards that you have, right?
I want to turn that off because I keep getting a message from a friend of mine who just told me that one of our good friend's husband passed away today. Wow, I'm kind of shocked. I'm shocked. Wow. Well, also the God, my mind just went blank just hearing this news. I was like, I don't know if y'all saw it pop up on the bottom of the screen, but yeah, my friend just messaged me. Whatever the soccer game that is worldwide, the World Cup is coming in June. So I don't know if they're kind of cleaning up downtown with the homeless population or whatever, but that would be conspiracy as well. Um, I don't know. It's just an awful situation. Wow. Have you ever like had those? I mean, to be off what I'm talking about this case, have you ever had those moments when you're just going along and all of a sudden somebody sends you a message or a phone call and you hear news like this and you're just kind of taken back on it because I've known this couple for a very long time, since 2000, and I just talked to her probably, I don't know, Thanksgiving. Supposedly he had Achilles tendon repair. And he passed away today. They think it was a blood clot. So that tells you, yes, indeed, if you don't already know, life is really fragile. Make sure you keep those that you love, and even those that you don't. Make sure you leave no word unsaid. And that kind of goes along with what we're talking about in this case, because I'm pretty sure there's somebody looking for one of these people that passed away, you know? I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. It just y'all saw the message, I'm sure. I mean, you may not have read it, but you saw it. But yeah. Well, thank you so much for those of you that joined me tonight. And even if you didn't chat, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't became a subscriber already, and share and tell people about the channel, because it's totally different than any other true crime channels other than mainstream media, I believe, because I try to give informative stuff, kind of like about the drowning, even if I'm not talking about it. I like to hear other people who actually do it for a living discuss it, to learn from it, to kind of dispel all the myths about certain things that maybe we've heard along the way that really aren't true. Because believe it or not, there are some things in life that we may believe with our whole heart that really might not be on the mark. You know what I'm saying? So that's all I have for you tonight. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Once again, my name is 12 Gauge, and this is my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. I hope to see you back. Take care of your families and take care of yourself. See you soon.
I'm closed on answers still, hunting the truth. Welcome to 12 Gauge, no whipping.